So, hello, welcome. Thanks you all for coming. Thanks for Steve showing us that plugin. That's pretty neat and is very relevant to this kind of stuff we're looking at too. So, my name is Laura, not Laura. So, L-A-R-A, very important, like Lara Croft. Or I just realized Lara Data, who is a Bollywood star, and apparently was like second runner-up for most beautiful person in the world. So, I have good things going for me here with these analogies. This is me on the web, not Laura.com, at LaraS126, if you are of Twitter persuasion. I also, here we go, coding for WordPress. I also teach coding for WordPress. So I do a lot of teaching and kind of freelance work as my business, and I love teaching, and particularly kind of demystifying all this code stuff. So if you saw the talk I did last time, the part one, it was a lot about just kind of general concepts like how the web works, how a browser works, what is HTML, what is CSS, and part two today is going to be a lot more like, oh my god, text, code, different colors. So hopefully that'll be okay. And again, like my philosophy about all this stuff is really that it's about the exposure to the words. Literally just the words. So like have this thing some kind of association in the back of your mind with what I'm saying and kind of what's on the screen, what it looks like, a little bit of context. So if anything it's kind of mind-boggling to you, then that's good. That means you have a lot to learn. That's really good stuff. I'm going to start out by kind of going over some general programming concepts, and then some specific WordPress stuff, and then get into some examples. We'll have some time for that. So first, to distinguish kind of coding and programming. So what we looked at last time, HTML and CSS, is very much along the lines of coding and the idea of building things. There's no logic involved. You're not manipulating data. You're not resizing. You're not like creating new images. You're not saving things to a database. There's no search algorithm. So all of that stuff happens in programming and in a programming language. And so the programming language WordPress uses is, of course, PHP. And then what PHP does is it renders things and turns them into HTML, which is something the browser can consume. So we're going to look at kind of general programming concepts that apply across the board, then some WordPress-specific stuff, by no means a comprehensive view of all these things. When I was writing this, I was like, oh my god, this could be a 6-day talk. Sure. And nobody wants to do that. So without further ado, programming concepts. Okay. Number 1, variables. 2, logic. 3, functions. That's all. Just kidding. We'll get into it later. Okay. Also, I'm using a little bit of a sushi metaphor for these programming concepts. I like to do, rather than jumping like right into like, oh, this is how a post works, this is how a page works. Those are pretty weighted concepts. Like sushi is something everybody can understand, right? And has anybody seen these sushi cat pictures before? Generally steer clear of cat pictures in my slides because I don't like cats that much, but these are pretty funny. They're great, you know, so if you're bored right now, you can just look up sushi pictures. Okay, so variables. A variable is essentially a little container. Okay, so it's kind of an alias for a type of data. And there are 3, 4 main types of data. So our first one up here, we have a name. So the container is called name. And then the value of the container is spicy tuna. And that's what we call a string. So a string is an arbitrary set of text, meaning that the computer or the program, whatever's running, has no specific association or instructions for reading that text in a certain way. According to the program, it's just like, okay, that's text, I don't care, I don't need to know anything else. Then we have this variable called amount, which is an integer. Number, no quotes. Program knows it's a number. You could, if I wanted to call this name and have an integer value after it, I could do that. I just responsibly named my variable, so that's something you want to think about too. Is like always being very intentional about what you name things and kind of future-proofing it and sticking to any coding conventions that you set for yourself as you go. And that stuff comes with a lot of experience. Is delicious is what we call a Boolean. Anybody heard the term Boolean before? Seen it around? I don't know where that came from.
There's a guy named Boole who invented formal logic. B-O-O-L-E.
Okay, nice. Well, thanks to him. got Booleans. Nice, we can all, that's nice. That's kind of a fun word to say, Boolean. So it's delicious. True or false would be a Boolean. Then we also have arrays. And this is something you'll see a lot in WordPress. So there are arrays within arrays within arrays. So an array is a list. Okay, so our list here is sushi, an array of sushi, types of sushi rolls. So that's all you need to think about is an array as a list. Sometimes in PHP, or in WordPress particularly, you'll have this idea of a key value. So the array becomes a little more complicated where you have like California roll, and then maybe a little angle, and then it has some other value associated with it. So those are what are called multi-dimensional arrays. Not a terribly important term to memorize, but when you see this array or like this comma separated list, be like, okay, it's a list of something. Like we're doing many things to one set of things. Oof. Okay, arrays. Yay! Okay, Blue's Clues. Anybody recognize this immediately? Blue's Clues kind of went away, but I like to think of the variables as mailboxes a little bit. So another big part of using a variable as a container is that you take things in and out of it, like you can replace what's inside it. So when I have that amount variable for my sushi, I am going to replace what that number is as I eat my sushi rolls, right? So if I have amount starts as 6, it's going to go down every time I eat a roll. So it's going to be 1 or 0 by the end of it. So same as with mailbox, you're kind of adding and replacing things. Logic. I mean, kind of know what logic is. So if then, if true, do this. If false, do this. That's kind of all there is to it, but not really. So here we have a Boolean variable, loves sushi. So this is a true false value. And our syntax here says if loves sushi. Notice in PHP, all of this, these samples are in PHP. So if I had been writing them in JavaScript or Ruby or Python, any other language, the syntax would be a little bit different. We're talking about PHP with WordPress, so $signs denote a variable in PHP. So we have a Boolean variable true, and my logic for this is if loves sushi equals true. Notice we've got an equals equals here, not just an equals. I'll get to that in a second. And then we're opening up these brackets. So this is some of the hardest stuff about learning to code in general, is like the syntax. I think I talked about this last time a lot too, but this is similar to CSS a little bit. Like you kind of open a bracket and you close a bracket. But then we have this else here. So this is saying if this condition does not apply, which in this case would be if love sushi is false, then go hungry. So these are functions. So get sushi is going to have a certain set of instructions that's associated with it. So if love sushi is true, we're going to do all these things. We're going to go get sushi. If it's not, we're going to go hungry, which I'm kind of hungry now, and obviously was when I was working on this. But not too hungry, otherwise it would have been about Cracker Barrel or something. Not really. Okay. Okay. This is a little bit different, but the same. So we've got the different syntax here. And this is, again, I think most programming languages have a couple options for how to format conditionals like this. Like you'll see a little colon a lot. Sometimes there'll be like a little question mark as a shorthand. But particularly in WordPress, because it is so annoying to format opening and closing PHP tags, which we'll see in this, later on too. Because that is so annoying, a lot of times you'll see this syntax, which works a little bit better than having the opening and closing brackets. But this is exactly the same as this. It's doing exactly the same thing. So you can either choose to use these brackets or the words else and if like that. Okay, so let's get a little more complicated here. So now we have introduced pizza into the equation. So loves sushi, yes, true. Loves pizza, true. So we have some more data we're dealing with now. There's some more functionality for our program or our hungry human being. So if loves sushi is true, of course we're going to get sushi. Another condition, if loves pizza is true, then we're going to get pizza, otherwise go hungry. So, all right, that's fine. Like we can do that. What if someone loves sushi and loves pizza? Maybe think about that. Okay, they're going to get both, because I'm not saying, like here, if I said loves sushi equals true and loves pizza equals false kind of do the same thing. So this is where like the logic stuff starts to get a little more complicated than the if then. And if you're not careful, it could turn into this. So conditionals are not necessarily a way to structure your whole program. And like in WordPress, I would argue you should use as few of them as possible, because in that case you're not leveraging kind of other WordPress functions or the template hierarchy and all of the other functionality that's built into WordPress, because this is a very manual way of coding and not future-proof. So, for example, this is if you were, I don't know, choosing what drinks to get somewhere. So it's like, if loves sushi is true, and, so notice these little double ampersands. So that's how we can add some more information to the conditional. So we have love sushi is true, and, so I'm saying if that's true, as well as this, loves beer, not equal true, this little bang, call it bang in development. All right, exclamation mark, whatever, is not true, then we're gonna get sushi and we're gonna get sake instead. And so I'm writing my thing and I'm going through all of these conditions and my brain's like gonna explode a little bit because this is kind of aggressive. So that is what we would call spaghetti code, and you want to not fall into that trap. So if you ever find yourself writing more than two or three else ifs, I would say two else ifs in something, then it's like, okay, I need to rethink about how to do this, or approach it from a different angle. It doesn't mean you need to write some complicated, ingenious, perfect set of like a 3-line function that accounts for everything. It just means like, oh, as a person developing a WordPress site, I don't need to get into it quite that much. So that's the DRY principle, so dry, so don't repeat yourself. So if you do anything 3 times or more, it's like, okay, light goes off, let me think about this. That being said, one way to deal with not having spaghetti code like that, all of these else ifs, else, are functions and loops. So this is introducing like a more dynamic way of thinking. So functions and loops. A function, get food. So before we had all of these functions for like get sushi, get pizza, get sake, get beer, get blah, 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 blah. So there's a lot of redundant steps in getting beer versus getting sake, right? Go to the liquor store, pick out my bottle, pay. I don't need to rewrite those instructions for every single function. So what I can do here is create this reusable set of steps. And now it's called get food. And it takes what we call a parameter or an argument for food. So what I'm saying is we're going to apply this set of instructions to any food that I put in here. So this is a little placeholder, essentially. And when I call that function, it's going to look like this. So get food sushi, get food pizza, something along those lines. And of course, I haven't completely fleshed out this. I haven't completely fleshed out this program, and I'm not going to. But this is how this would go. So whenever I run the program now, I would have if get food. Okay, so sushi, and so we'd say find a restaurant with sushi. If the restaurant has food, return food. So I'm gonna like give the food. Otherwise, return some kind of error. So that's the idea of also accounting for different cases. Like you're gonna find this, especially once you get into doing what you think would be small things in WordPress. There's a lot of little steps you have to account for as you go. So we can also use an array here and use a little loop. So this is redundant. So if I was getting a bunch of different kinds of food, I would find myself writing get food a bazillion times. So instead, I can make an array of foods. And then I can say for each type in foods, and that's one way to do a loop in PHP. There's a few different syntaxes for it. Get food type. So this is going to do what's called like iterating over the array. So for every single thing in here, it's going to run this one time. So after this, I will have gotten all of the food. Does that sound familiar to anybody in terms of how WordPress works? What does that remind you of?
Basic.
What's that?
It's just basic programming language.
Right, but I mean in WordPress specifically. Like this idea, what's that?
The loop.
The loop. Right, so we have, so yeah, I mean, it absolutely is like fundamental programming concepts, like this
No,
idea
actually,
of,
the original basic C is placeholder.
Oh, okay, I thought you meant it's basic, and I was like, well, yeah, it's basic, but.
There's no basic or
Oh, sure, yeah. But in WordPress specifically, we are given this array of data whenever we look at an archive page, or even if we're looking at a single page, or a page, it's still called a post. Pick your battles. So we get this set of data, and we want to do something to each of those, rather than creating a new HTML page for every article on our site. We say for, we use a while loop in WordPress, but we say that for each post, essentially, do these things. Okay, here's a non-food example now. And this is, you can totally like paste this into your code, and this will work. So categories. So categories, this is going to be an array. And in WordPress, when you're dealing with WordPress, you're never going to hard code an array when you're talking about requesting data. So there are a lot of functions that will return all of the data you're looking for, ultimately. So this function happens to return an array of categories. And so once I have that array, like you could think of this, if I printed this out somehow, it would be exactly like this, except each of these would be the name of one of my categories. There's more information involved in that, but essentially it's just going to be a list of every single category. And then I say for each categories as cat. So cat becomes my placeholder name. And I say echo cat and then name. So what that little arrow is doing, that's drilling into some more information that's part of the category. And this is something you can find on the docs. So you'll become very familiar with the docs, the WordPress documentation. So there's the codex, and then we'll look at, there's kind of a new movement to build everything into a different site through the WordPress docs, which is great. So here I'm using a little bit of logic too. So I say if the category's name is featured, then I want to do something special for that. So maybe I have a category called featured, and I want all of my posts to have like a little star next to them that are featured. So in this way, I can loop through all those categories and then apply a certain functionality to a specific element within that loop. Whew, okay. WordPress, yeah. How you guys doing? This is gonna be this is a lot of stuff to get through. So, well, we can do it though. Remember, sponge mode, yeah.
So this code is like on a child thing, or where is this? Obviously, you don't want to edit like we were talking before.
Right.
It's directly, so where is this?
So all of this, and we're gonna look at some files in a little bit, but all of this is within your theme. And if you are coding like this, you need to have a local environment set up. I mean, you could do it on your server if you have some kind of like dummy site set up, but you want to be doing this in a text editor. So, and that's like another conversation about setting that up step to step, but lots of documentation. So if you kind of Google local WordPress install MAMP. MAMP is the software you're going to use to install a server on your machine. But the idea is to have a little playground, so you're not doing this live, and then also to use a text editor, which is a program that's meant for coding, for writing code like this. Yeah. Okay, WordPress is made of functions. Lots and lots of functions. Do not battle them. So this is a common pitfall for everyone, is you get something, you're like, oh, this is so annoying. So for example, if you use the native WordPress function for printing out a navigation menu, it adds all the markup, it adds a bunch of classes for you, and you might be like, God, this is so annoying. How do I change this from, how do I add my own class name to this? How do I edit this markup at all? Like, where is this coming from? And instead of going in and hard coding out all of your links in HTML, which is kind of the easy way to do it, don't do that, because it's going to bite you eventually. But instead, look at the documentation. And there are ways to work with these functions to customize what you're looking for. So, WordPress currently, the team is moving over the documentation from the codex, which everything used to be on the codex, to this developer.wordpress.org. So you'll go to that a lot, and it's structured a really, really nice way. It's coming up very, very nicely. Lots of examples, things like that. So if I want to search WP nav menu, and this is something I'm kind of pulling off the top of my head here. So WP nav menu, displays a navigation menu. Okay, nice. Looking here. And so the way these documentation pages are set up, it's all based on kind of the functions that are built into WordPress. So we were talking about our eating program. WordPress has a whole slew of functions, like all of those files inside the WordPress installation, all filled with functions. Functions, variables, logic, that's it. So, look, it's not simple at all, but each of these pages for a function tells you specific information about that function, including a parameter. So just like with our food, we can pass certain information to the function, and it will change its role, or it'll change what it does based on that information. So this WP map menu takes an array, which means it's going to be a list of instructions. And we're going to get to args in a second, because that was something that tripped me up so much when I was learning WordPress. I was like, what is args? I don't understand this args thing. So, but if we want to change the HTML, for example, or add something before or after the text, it's in here. And ideally, there's going to be a bunch of examples, which is in development. But become very good friends with this, or just look things up and get familiar with the terms. Okay. So the next few things are going to be the specific ways to deal with WordPress functions. So we have actions and filters. And the idea of an action and filter are we are hooking into what WordPress runs automatically. So when you load a WordPress page, it's doing all of this stuff. And so with an action and filter, we are allowed to either modify what WordPress is doing or kind of hook in and add our own functionality. So an action means you're going to be adding functionality to WordPress. So you're going to grab WordPress at a certain point and say, hey WordPress, stop for a second, let me just do this thing also. So this is a good example here. Enqueuing a style sheet. So every theme needs to enqueue a style sheet. Enqueue means add it, essentially. So add it to the queue of styles that are running. And this is an action, because WordPress runs this function already, and we want to add our own functionality to it. So I'm hooking into WP enqueue scripts. That's the main WordPress function that runs, and that's the function that's the point at which we want to inject our script in the process. And then I say my function name. So this is always 100% going to be the structure of an action or filter, adding an action or filter. It's the WordPress function, and then your function. And so you'll notice I have this WP-NYC text here. That's not in WordPress. Of course, it'd be cool if functions were named after our meetup here, but they're not. So this is what's called a namespace. And you'll see this a lot when you're going through blog posts and things like that. A lot of times you're like, why does it say CMP or OZ in front of these function names? And that's a namespace. So in WordPress too, you'll see WP_nav menu, and that's the WordPress namespace. In all of my themes, I come up with a unique namespace for every function I write, just so that I know that I wrote it later on. Because WordPress, for example, has a function called register post type. If I was registering my post types and I was like, oh, well, I'll say register website post type. That sounds better. That's not entirely clear what the difference is between register website post type and register post type. So instead, I would say ls_register post type. Post types, something like that. So that's the idea of namespacing. And that's one of these conventions that's pretty common across the board when you're talking about programming and development. So that's what an action is. Then we have a filter. So a filter is adding or altering somehow the data returned by a function. So anything that is, like the content, for example, is a function that's in pretty much every WordPress template, and that pulls the content from the WYSIWYG editor. So if I wanted to change the content that's being spat out of that, I would need to filter that content. And the same with this example is for body classes. So if you've ever seen in a template that says post class or body class somewhere, that is a WordPress function that's putting out a whole bunch of data. And so if I want to add something to that or take it out, I can write a filter that will modify that. So here we have WP-NYC body classes is what I've named my function, and then classes is the data that's going, I think that's a case every single time. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but if you're ever filtering something, it will have a parameter here, which is what you're returning. So this is kind of like, it's taking data called classes. So this function, in order to run, requires some data already. So I'm taking classes, which is the array that already exists, the content that's already coming from the default WordPress function. And then I'm going to return it after I've made some modifications. So here we're using a little conditional. So if WP is mobile, which is a nice little conditional that's in WordPress now, I'm going to add an is mobile class to the body. And then I return them. So if I didn't return this, then I would have no body classes anymore. There would be nothing. So I need to return this. And then I'm going to add filter instead of add action. And the same way I have my WordPress function and then the body classes function. All of those are going to go inside of functions.php. So when we're talking about actual files, these are not things that would go inside of a template file. So files like page.php, single.php, archive.php, those are all content templates. And you want to keep yourself from writing actions and filters in those as much as you can. Because they do not need to run in there. They can be in a separate place. And if you're adding all of that to your template files where you're writing HTML and marking up and working on your template code, it can get really confusing and just too long. So you can add those to functions.php. That's what those for. Okay. Whew. Lots of stuff to talk about.
So does it hit functions before it hits any pages?
Yeah, functions would be evaluated first. Yeah. Does anybody have a question? Take a little questions. So more stuff to go through. But any other major things?
What's the editor that you're using to write all this stuff?
Oh, Sublime Text, which we're going to look at the end. Yeah, I'm a big Sublime user for sure. Free, wonderful.
It is free.
For like 5,000 saves or something. But you should buy it because it's just so good. I felt really guilty after a while. So I bought it. Yeah.
On the prior slide, when you showed adding to a class, maybe the prior, that one, where you said classes, brackets is mobile, is that the way to append to a list?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is the syntax for adding to an array.
Is there a list of all this stuff?
Google.
Let me rephrase the question. Does this Sublime thing come with tutorials?
So Sublime does not have anything directly to do with PHP or WordPress. That's a general program you would use for editing any code, any kind of code. So PHP and WordPress are separate entities that you would reference for documentation and tutorials. So basically, if you Google like PHP tutorial, then you'll read a tutorial, but it's not related to Sublime necessarily.
Sublime's just the way to write stuff, but the PHP, that's what they're writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, for anybody who hasn't done it before, like the idea of the text editor is really strange because you think like if you're in Microsoft Word, for example, there's a dictionary you can look things up in. That's, well, there kind of is that in Sublime, you could have that, but it's not necessarily related to the whatever software you're working in or whatever program you're working in.
But it's formatting for you. It's making sure you have ending brackets, beginning brackets.
It's not 100% always going to do that, but yes, it helps a lot. It helps a lot.
It's setting up the blank line.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is not Sublime. We're going to look at Sublime. This was annoying. But okay, yeah, let's go. So template tags. A couple more of these WordPress things, and then we'll look at some examples in Sublime and kind of where this stuff all fits together. So a template tag. This is going to go in your templates, of course. You wouldn't have you could have some template tags inside of functions.php if they are within one of these actions or filters. Otherwise, though, a template tag is going to be what gives you your data in the template. So just like in page.php, you have the title somewhere that's printing out the title because we don't want to have hard-coded titles in. We use template tags to get specific information from the database. So a template tag will say get the content, or get the title, or get the tag. You will spend way more time refining your search queries than you do actually coding. No, I mean, that is absolutely true. It's very frustrating and whatever, but it's also ultimately puzzle solving. You kind of figure it out. But it's so, like, with WordPress and any framework, I think you can apply this too. It's so important to like work within the boundaries of WordPress and work with WordPress instead of against it. So again, if I was doing something like this, and I was like, oh, this is annoying, I'm just gonna like hard code the thumbnail in, or like, and then hard code the thumbnail source in. And then if I do that, I'm not gonna be taking advantage of all the responsive image stuff that WordPress does now. So these functions do certain things that are really good for us, and that's what makes WordPress amazing. So we wanna play nicely with them and figure out the right way to do it. That's part of WordPress, and that's very difficult because there's a lot of ways to do something. But back to my Google screen here. Search in plain language. How do I change the post thumbnail size? That's perfect. And then pay very close attention as you are typing this to what comes up in this auto fill, because someone has searched this before. I mean, I know it's nice to think we have like really novel problems to solve, but I think we really don't. I mean, I'll speak for myself, but someone somewhere has Googled this several thousand times, and if I'm not finding answers, I'm not using the right terms, I'm not using the right words. So that is so important to focus more on finding the right words to search for and understanding what those words are versus memorizing documentation, things like that. Like you would never ever go to the list of words. Like if we look at how many functions, or like even in here, we look at how many functions are in WordPress. So let's browse the functions here. And before my internet problems. Okay, so bedtime reading. I'm gonna go through and be like, okay, tonight I'm gonna memorize abs int, activate plugin, activate plugins, activate sideway plugin, add slashes, and then I'll keep going all 95 pages for the rest of my natural life. So it doesn't work like that. You want to think and understand terms, understand what meta means once you need it, and then you kind of want to make these associations and figure out the best way to search for something. That's really what the goal is. So, like I said, if we search for this, let me go back. Okay, so I get a few options. Change post thumbnail size. And I like to do the kind of workflow of opening a bunch of things at once. And I think that's kind of how everybody ends up working after a certain amount of time. So I look at this and just quick scan, it's like, okay, this is good, post thumbnails, how to change post thumbnail size. Maybe I look like, oh, this looks interesting, add image size, I don't know what that one is. So open up a bunch of these and kind of go through, and you really want to get the full gamut of what's out there, what's available. And be very discerning about what you use and what you try. But so I look at set post thumbnail size. Notice that this function name is on the codex. It's not on that fancy code reference site. So this is something that was frustrating me for a while, and I just realized what they were doing. So the documentation's like switching over. But set post thumbnail size. So set the default featured image dimensions. Okay, that sounds pretty close to what I want to do. So I'm going to bookmark that in my head, keep that up as an option. Post thumbnails, this is like a big, okay, that's cool, but that's too much for me to read. This is literally how I go through things. I'm like, that's too, I don't want to look at that. That's too, I don't care how good it is, I just like don't want to read that right now. And then you find what works for you. So how to change the post thumbnail. Okay, ooh, this is something I just saw before. So you want to pay attention to some repetition as you're looking through these results. And then, oh, what's this? Post thumbnail. Select from the following options. Thumbnail, okay, this is something to look at. I can even just like plop this in and test it. And if you're working on your computer and not going to break a live site, then there's no repercussions for doing this. Try it out. And you can always Command Z, which you cannot do in that editor screen in WordPress. If you save, you're not ever going to know what's happening because it's a page reload. So text editor is very important, a real one. So I'm going through here. All right. Okay, by now I'm seeing this again. Okay, set post thumbnail size again. I'm going to check this out. Set post thumbnail size. That sounds good. And so it turns out that is definitely an option. So you can set the post thumbnail size, and it takes a few arguments of the height and the width, and then the crop. So whether or not you want it to be cropped. And that's going to go inside of functions.php. And I'm going to do this little example after I finish thinking about this stuff. There's another option, though, which is this one. When we saw this here, thumbnail, medium, large. I think Steve mentioned before that, one second. Like WordPress generates like 5 different image sizes whenever you upload an image. So that's what these are: thumbnail, medium, large, and then there's full also. If you've seen those in the media settings section, that's what these refer to. And the post thumbnail, back to the docs here, it takes an argument of size. And strangely, the default size is called post thumbnail, and for me it happens to be 1600 pixels wide, which isn't really a thumbnail. But then there's also a size called thumbnail, that's much smaller. Something to get used to. And that happens in the media settings section. So has anybody been in here before? Change the media settings? In the maybe slightly hidden section, but I can change the post thumbnail size there. And then you will find, when you do that, you'll be like, nothing changed. Why not? And then you'll Google, post thumbnail size didn't change. And then it will lead you to Regenerate Thumbnails, which is a plugin that will tell WordPress, hey, reevaluate all of the images you've already resized because we added a new size. Then you're going to add this to your template once I have that thumbnail size in place in the media settings. So that's a lot of steps. It's a lot of steps. And it all comes down to repetition. There's no easy solution, honestly. Like, you can read books till your eyes fall out, watch tutorials till your eyes fall out, but you gotta just do it and like get the repetition of like running into these problems and then figuring out like, oh, okay. So every time you figure out one of those solutions for yourself, I think it really cements it in a way that you don't get from learning from tutorials. So I can't emphasize enough how valuable it is to sit down and do this stuff. Pay attention to. You gonna sit down?
Yeah, just curious, are there any sites that you see in repetition, like these are great sites that tend to have the right answer?
Oh, CSS tricks. The WordPress Stack Exchange is generally good, but you want to, and I have another thing about this, but always pay attention to dates. So like on here, I'm looking at this, like, okay, 2013 is not too bad. Remember, WordPress is 10 years old, over 10 years old now. So 2013 is not terribly old in terms of WordPress. 2008 is too old. So if you see something in 2008, that's too old. So look at this, and so WordPress Stack Exchange. Honestly, don't pay attention to specific sites. Like, don't search a specific site. Always search Google, because you never know if some random person wrote an excellent blog post about that, then that article is going to come up when you search that topic. So it's always important to start with Google, but then recognize what sites, and as you work, you'll be like, oh wow, I found really good solutions on this site, so you'll have kind of a positive association with it. And always open those multiple tabs. Some sites, like, not to call them out too much, but like WP Beginner, sometimes has good things, but sometimes they'll be like, oh, you want to do this? Download this plugin. It's like, that's not what I wanted to do. So you gotta be a little discerning, for sure. But
CSS tricks.
yeah, CSS tricks is great, like incredibly reputable. Excellent. But always do Google, because there totally can be that one random blog post that's really good that you're not going to be able to read if you go to a specific site. So, okay, but yeah, there's a lot of steps. And that's kind of how it'll go. So I was going to do a demo of listing child pages on a website. So if you've ever had and this would be a pretty common way to set up a website. So if you had a parent page that was like about, and then you had child pages of like team, mission, location, whatever. And you might want to list those as like, oh, other pages on each of them. And that's one of those things that's like so many steps. Like, I started doing, and I was like, oh, sure, I have this, and I was like, oh, there's no way I can do this in front of people. So conditional tags. Next thing. This may be the last one. Okay. They're handy, and there are a lot of them. Let's check it out. Maybe. not front page, show the post thumbnail. So this is back to my example of like showing things on a page. So I want to have my featured image on page show up, but I don't want to on the front page because I have maybe like a big slider or something like that. So if it isn't the front page, and all these conditionals will be denoted by an is underscore, pretty much. So if I'm in single.php then, maybe I want to check for a specific tag and add a little class for that tag specifically on the title. So here I'm saying if has tag, so this is another, like I guess a not is conditional, but this takes a parameter of what tag. So if has tag nice tag, the title, so the title is going to actually give me HTML, and the title takes a couple of parameters for what HTML is in front and what HTML is after the title. So I'll say if has tag nice tag, then I want to add a class of nice title. Otherwise, just do standard title. So that's an example of something you might check for. Like let's say you have a tag for featured or a tag for recipes, and on the single pages you want to put a little like a caret next to anything that's a recipe. That's an example of where you might use this has tag or some kind of conditional there. Also, it could be in archive.php. So if we want to check for a specific post archive, so let's say I have a custom post type for a recipe, and I want to check if this is the recipe post type. So I can say if is post type archive recipe, and this takes a parameter of the type post it is. And all of this can be found in a tutorial for sure, or referencing the video later. Then I have this thing. So get template part is essentially an include. So in PHP or any language really, you can include other files. So you kind of like mash them in to another one, and that's the way to keep your code shorter, keep your files a little cleaner. So that's what this get template part is looking for a file called header-recipe in a folder called partials. I don't want to get into that too much, but that's our logic here. We're including a different header based on what the post type archive is. Sushi! Okay. Oh my god. One more, I think. Okay, alrighty, this args thing. I wasn't gonna put this in because I was like, this is gonna be long. But I honestly, has anybody else had this problem with args? Like in your, when you see this? For some reason, this took me so long to understand. Because if any function you look up pretty much, you're gonna see something that says like args, like this might say args. Let's see what we got over here. This will probably have it. If we look at like register post type, it's kind of the standard. Alright, maybe not. Okay, args. Here we go. So arg stands for arguments. And maybe this is just me, but this like drove me nuts. So arg stands for arguments. The same as we had that food section, like food was our argument or our parameter. So args is a set of instructions, or args is going to be a list, an array of instructions for what data the function is supposed to return. So if I'm using WP query, which is how I would get a certain loop of posts. So if I'm outside a loop on a template page and I want to get to another variable. So when you see args, just think of it as this little like inventory of options you have for what data you're selecting or what content you're changing. And then if I were to apply that query to a template, I would have query have posts. So the normal loop would be while have posts, but this is going to be query have posts. So I'm kind of filtering my request through this query screen. Okay. So okay, any questions? Feel free to ask a question now if you want to. Break for a sec. Alright. Nice hide we glossed over. Okay. So let's do this this post thumbnail thing and where this is. So we already wrote the code for this pretty much in the slides. But to look at where and that's going to be in single.php. So if I wanted to add some markup to single.php, then I can do that in single.php. And they look pretty similar because there's a lot of consistent markup that goes, and markup meaning HTML, a lot of consistent markup that is throughout the website on each template. But for page.php for now, I want to show the featured image. So I had that conditional before because I didn't want it to be on the front page. So I had if, and then not is underscore front page. And I have a little requester here that is actually really annoying because it'll do, oh, that was okay. Sometimes it spits out way too much stuff. But that's a little Sublime plugin that can help request functions for you. So if isn't front page, then I'll open up my brackets, and then does anybody remember the function for printing out all the thumbnail information? What's that? I guess print is a little bit of a weird thing to say. To give me all of the image markup. What was the function name?
What's it called? Something or other.
The something or other, yes. The whatever. Get the post thumbnail wouldn't print anything out, wouldn't echo anything because it's just like getting the data and not doing anything with it yet. So I would say the post thumbnail. Okay. And let's not have this here. Okay. So the post thumbnail. And let me load up my page. Here. Okay, so this is my front page. I don't see a post thumbnail. Cool. If I look at page A, I also don't see a post thumbnail. So I'm like, is this working? The next thing to check is, do you have a post thumbnail on that page? Because I didn't add any condition for if there is a post thumbnail at all. So here, I'm going to add a featured image. And then if I preview my changes now, I'll see my post thumbnail. So one thing I can do if I want to add a condition for not having a post thumbnail, maybe if my client's working on this and they always need to have a featured image, then I can put a little note that's an else. So if I say, if they don't have a post thumbnail, then write something for that. So I'm in here, so I can say if not is front page. Then I can say if has underscore post thumbnail. And I'll say the post thumbnail here. So the post thumbnail. And now if there is no post thumbnail, nothing's going to happen, but maybe I want to put a note. And so you can say echo, and echo in PHP terms can be like render something to the HTML. And I'll say echo, please upload a thumbnail. And notice I have my semicolon. So the syntax is like a little, and maybe this is where you'd want to look into using that colon, like the different if-else syntax, if that helps you clean it up a little bit. But we've got kind of a conditional within a conditional here. And a lot of times I'll space things out a little more like this. That kind of helps me see it. And this tabbing is so important. So if I have this out here, it's kind of like, okay, it works, don't touch it. Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, not helpful. So you always want to have things be viewable at a glance. And like keeping your tabbing really consistent is very important there. So I refresh. I have my post thumbnail, cool. But let's see what's up with page B. Oh, okay. Now I have my little note because there is no. So now I have a little bit of smaller. What? I'm gonna pause on. I'm gonna send around the snippets of code for these other little things, but I'm thinking this. Eyes and my eyes. A little bit. This is a lot. It's like a lot to look at code on a projector, and not the most efficient way to do it. In terms of sit down and do it yourselves. So, with that in mind, some sage advice. Okay, do not try to memorize anything ever. I mean, some things in life you probably should memorize. Never, I guess. You don't even need to memorize phone numbers. So some things, but not when it comes to work. Don't try to memorize anything. You will remember it over time. It's not something that you sit down and let me memorize all. You'll be Googling more than coding. How about that? There are many, many ways to do one thing. Not all are created equal, but as you're learning, don't worry about doing it the right way yet. Get it to work, and then keep plugging away, and eventually it'll break, and then you'll realize a better way to do it, and that's just kind of how the whole. Hopefully, it's not a terrible. Understand most of the code that you copy. Honestly, I have totally pulled things, and I feel like super comfortable pulling things off of blog posts because I know like what every line does. I couldn't write it myself, but I know what every line does. So kind of understand most of it, and then again, if it breaks, then you'll fix it. And you'll figure it out. Look at the dates of what you reference. No copying code. Paste the link to the code you copied in a comment. That's really important because if it's a whole chunk, whatever, and you're like, that's magic, it works, oh my god. So you want to have that reference somewhere in your file because when it does break, you have some point to reference back to. Interesting. Proper indenting is really important. And then a solution with less code, this is a very general, not going to apply across the board. Not going to apply across the board, but a solution with less code is usually better. That means it's leveraging WordPress, because WordPress has a whole bunch of code there that's there for us to use and modify as we need. So if there are fewer lines and more just kind of isolated functions, then that's going to be better than someone writing their whole own PHP plugin and not using anything. So less code. Anyway, I'll do a little bit. So I like teaching a lot, and I have very strong opinions about how people learn best. I'm not a fan of Codecademy like that. I think it's great, but it's not the be all end all. So stop watching. Like so, I don't know. It's like depressing kind of to hear people that are like, oh man, I can't figure this out and watch so many tutorials. No, you gotta sit down and do it. It's not easy and it's very frustrating. Not something you want to put your weekend into. But anyway, so I'm working on an online school, and there are a lot of there are four classes. Kind of walking through like 0 to building really custom websites. That's like with Timber, which is a different a library that lets you not deal with people. But they're live classes. So these are the recordings, but they're a live session. Talk together, debug things together, and you'll see me make mistakes, a lot of mistakes. In the videos, I make a lot of mistakes. I think of it as like web development from the street. Swear to. Anyway, so I'll find it if you're interested. Check it out. Otherwise, this is what I want you guys to accomplish. Avalanche. And as a sad announcement, because I'm leaving New York, sadly. Sadly, happily, do my ski bum ambitions in Utah. So, thanks, guys. Oh, yeah, any questions? Huh?
When I look at Chrome, I have Windows machine. I don't have that menu across the top. I don't get it.
Which menu? This?
File, edit, view, yeah.
Don't worry about it. It's represented somewhere. I mean, that's not helpful. Don't worry about it. What's that? It's per window. Okay. So you don't have this consistent. So watch how this window, when I go to a different application, it changes. And so this changed.
I don't have it ever.
Okay. So it'll be in like in your Sublime. It'll show up like right here. It'll be inside of the window. It's not going to be on top of the screen. It's just in a different.
When they say file open, I don't have that file open.
Okay. Well, we could maybe look at it after. We don't have it.
I don't know. Saying it's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, I mean the interface is different. The functionality is like the way the text editor works. There's just a different series of clicks.
What's the
find it. What plugin did I use to suggest functions in Sublime and WordPress plugin? Okay. So one of these. Sorry.
Put in suggestions.
What's that? Suggestion, yeah. Yeah.
Do you use
It might be a
Coda?
snippet library.
Coda is,
Yeah.
you don't like it.
I'm not a fan. I use Coda for FTPing stuff. It's pretty chunky. Sublime, I don't know. I love Sublime. Atom, people also like Atom, but Sublime, there's so many extensions for it, and it's very open. There's a lot of community behind it. Coda is very closed off. But I'll find out the Sublime plugin. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So commenting here, kind of you can tell these are blue. So a slash is gonna be inline commenting. So that's kind of a little quick note to guide me. And always a great idea to do if you're whenever I'm developing something kind of not from scratch, but when I'm starting to think about a new feature, I can go through and write all of the functionality in comments. And to do that, I can use, if I'm doing longer comments, I can use this comment, which you'll see at the top of every WordPress. Oh, well, definitely every WordPress file, and depending on what starter theme you're using, you'll see it as well. So these are longer form. And these things, app package, app link, those are for documentation. So all of the stuff that's in the WordPress documentation is actually pulled from